All right, welcome back to another episode of EventHubs Talking Block. I am John Catalyst Gray, and with me as always is John Velociraptor Guerrero.
All right, well, if you've been looking around at FGC, Twitter, and Discourse, and Reddit, the hot button issue of the day is that there's a ton of confusion going around
10 points
about Ken in Street Fighter 6. It's up until about 10 minutes ago, he was, matter of fact, one of the top three, the big three as we've been calling it, and probably the best in the game. Now all of a sudden, we've got a bunch of high-level players who have been storied and performing and have resumes that are very long, saying that Ken is not only not the best, not only not in the top three, not in the top five, some of them are saying he's as bad as like 7th, maybe 8th place. And you're talking people like Chris Tatarian, talking people like Daigo Imahara, Phenom, Tokido, Shuto, Moke. There's a pretty big list and it's getting bigger. So we're going to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I want to warn everyone that we've been hearing that balancing decisions are being made right now for Season 2 at Capcom. And the players are out in droves just talking about how Ken is, dare I say it, not one of the strongest in the game. He's not one of them. And John, I want to ask you right away, where do you have Ken on your personal tier list? Where do you have this character?
I have him at number 1. We can get into some discussion about other characters, but you know what? The easy answer is I have him at number 1.
I have him as well at number 1. And so this is interesting because a lot of the interviews that are coming out with Ken not at number 1 actually happened at that FAV Cup or FAV Cup, however you want to pronounce it, in Japan. And this is the same event where it was a Ken mirror match in the grand finals, so he got first and second place. And so we just saw Ken yet again perform on a very big stage. And then so people's argument has been like, well, 3 out of the 7 people who were invited, they were Ken players. And so of course Ken is going to place well in the tournament. And it's like, okay, well, there's a whole other side of that coin here that you're not talking about, that the Ken players are so popular and winning so much that they got an invitation to a very large event. And it's not every character. It's like, how many Aki players did we see up there? How many Lily players did we see invited? Not many, but we saw 3 Ken players coming out there.
They were one of them qualified because he won a little tournament called Evo.
Yes.
Another one got 3rd place at Evo, and all of these players have been winning or performing with Ken.
It's almost like when you play a character, you like to downplay them a bit. But yeah, we're gonna definitely talk about that here a bit. So, but anyway, we keep on EventHubs a large database of stats and major fighting game tournaments on our website. We've looked through this stuff. We also looked through the new Buckler, it used to be CFN, stats and stuff like that. Ken was the number 1 character every single month since Street Fighter 6 has came out in terms of usage in ranked. And this is overall and in almost every one of the individual ranks to boot. So the very low ranks like Rookie and Iron, Ken was not number 1 consistently in those, but every other ranking, all the ones all the way up to Mastery, he's number 1 every single month since the game came out.
And if you look at we posted the popularity, the global character popularity stats from Aliette Faye, who took the samplings from Africa, Asia, Europe, South America, North America, and Oceania. And Ken was number 1 in all of them except for none. He was number 1 in all of them. Every single one. Ken, number 1.
Yeah, and Ken is also number 1 in our EventHubs user-voted tiers with nearly 500 votes on his matchups. 43 out of the 48 players are now qualified for Capcom Cup. That's coming up here in February. And Ken is in 2nd place for the most people using him. He's behind Luke, but there are 8 Kens in there right now. So Tokido... and I want to say this very, very clearly that generally around EventHubs, Tokido is very, very heavily respected and loved because of how honest he is about the characters that he plays. Generally, everyone on the staff just loves this guy because of, again, he owns it, right? His list didn't seem to be ordered, but in the short Twitter clip that we saw, he put Ken very clearly in his top 5. And this is the kind of stuff that we really like. Since we're highlighting the people who are not doing that, I want to very specifically shout out Tokido and just say, like, hey, look, like, this guy has consistently held when he's played the cheapest and best characters in the game. He always talks about doing that. And that is another feather in the Ken's cap of being a very strong character, the fact that Tokido is playing him.
Tokido's character choice in Street Fighter V was Ryu in Season 1, one of the absolute best characters in the game. I know Ryu's known as not being a good character in that game, but in Season 1, he was the bee's knees. In Season 2, of course, Tokido switched over to Akuma, won a little Evo at some point there. And then when Akuma got a little bit nerfed, he went over to Urien and then eventually Luke. So Tokido is definitely one to sniff out the top tiers, and that's, you know, especially now that there's $2 million, $1 million on the line for winning Capcom Cup. The pros should be picking the best characters. So I do want to push back a little bit on the fact that yes, everyone and their mother is using Ken, but the second most popular character in a lot of these statistics is Ryu, and Ryu is decidedly not one of the better characters in the games. Decent, but he's not one of the better ones. And you could argue that, well, just because a character is popular doesn't mean that they're the best. Some people will pick a character because they perceive them to be the best, but a lot of people just like them because they're either easy to play, they're recognizable, they have a fun style.
Yeah, I mean, the stats I'm looking at, like for the most recent one, like Ken is number 1, Luke's number 2, going down like the master list and stuff. But Ryu does end up being popular at lower levels of play. But at the higher levels of play, Ryu is definitely not as popular. He's down at 5th.
Yeah, and now I was going by the global character popularity too. Ryu's number 2 in all but one region, which is Asia, where he's number 6. But my point is, it's not only that a character is going to be popular because they're good, although they will be more popular if they're good. And the community definitely perceives Ken, widely speaking, as one of, if not the best characters in the game. Yes. So are we all just kind of wrong and the pros know more than we do, understand more than we do, or are we getting some downplayage?
Yeah, there's definitely some downplaying here. Speaking from doing this myself, I went from JP to Aki. I can tell you that learning a new character can be quite the adventure if you're playing the game at a high level, and especially, again, you want your high level tactics and other stuff left intact. Like if you don't have to pick up a whole brand new character, your character stays super strong and you're playing really well with that character, that is a huge advantage for these pro players who are trying to earn their living doing this. It's a really big thing. And I've also heard stuff like, you know, Dragon Lash is like the easiest thing to parry and all the other kind of stuff out there. The basic stuff is not working anymore because Ken is so popular and so many people play this character that it's almost impossible to find people at high levels of play who haven't labbed the Ken matchup pretty darn decently. You could probably find them out there, but you compare that to like someone like an Aki or a Lily, and it's like they probably haven't labbed that matchup practically at all. But that Ken matchup, there's no way in heck you have not spent some time in there in the training room trying to basically, you know, learn all the perfect parry timings and other stuff, because you're gonna see those attacks.
We could get into the whole idea of the progression of a character being stronger at the beginning because of their design, and then people catching up. And I've actually argued this to a certain degree with JP. I would say that when we first started playing against JP, who has abilities unlike anyone else in Street Fighter history, that trying to figure out how to deal with those abilities, learning your own character first and foremost, and then how to get around spikes and the particulars of, can you drive rush here, which is there a gap there? At first, you're going to get hit with everything all the time, and it's going to seem like there's no answers. But as you put it under the microscope, as you go to the lab with it, you find that there are answers, and then you have to reassess the matchup, because one of the things that you were using as this is an impossible matchup is no longer in place, or is at least no longer to the capacity that you thought it initially was, and that your emotions told you that it was.
Yes.
Now, you can see this also in, like, maybe the most obvious one is Honda. Honda, when we first started, was just throwing headbutts and just doing butt slams. And while that's still very much something that you'll run into when you face off with a Honda online, the amount of negativity and negative feelings toward Honda, like, oh, he's just so broken. No one's saying Honda is broken. He's got this gimmick, and you do have to learn how to deal with it and have a certain amount of execution to be ready for it. But once you are, it becomes a completely different matchup. Not only that, the way Honda is able to play this matchup evolves, because now he's got to do something other than just headbutt and butt slam all the time, and it becomes much more nuanced, and it, like I say, the whole thing evolves. How does that apply to Ken? I think Ken is very strong, and I think Ken has high marks in just about every relevant category. And we did a video on what makes you good as a character in Street Fighter 6. Right. I think Ken scores very high in damage output, in engagement, in corner carry, in drive rush abilities. A lot of the areas where you need to do well in Street Fighter 6, Ken does well. He might not be the single best in some, or maybe even any of those, but he's like number 2 in all of them, and I think that all adds up to him being the best in the game, even if you can find examples of other characters doing certain things better. Now, he's also one of the easiest characters to begin playing.
Yes.
And I don't mean that like Ken has some hard things to do. Ken has some situations where you have to be really dialed in and know exactly which follow-up to do to get the most out of it. I'm not saying he's just a all-around easy character, but it's easy to do Dragon Lash. Dragon Lash, similar to the way Honda's Headbutt or JP's Spikes were, was a completely different move when things started off. And it was, for most intents and purposes, I'm going to be up in your face +1, or I'm going to have just hit you. And that's what Dragon Lash almost was, because people weren't ready to deal with it. We didn't know how to perfect parry. We didn't have the reactions to drive impact it. You take that off the table, we, as the opposition to Ken, do have to consider, yes, Dragon Lash is not as good as it was. Then that might drop the character a little bit. But I would still say, and that's something that Chris Tatarian was saying, like everybody perfect parries Dragon Lash now.
Yes.
It's not what you thought it was. You need to reassess. Sure, fair enough. But I would say that everything that Ken has, including Dragon Lash, especially when it all comes together, adds up to actually a lot more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, it's like saying, hey, I'm a billionaire and I lost like $50 million. And it's like, okay, you lost $50 million, but you still have $950 million left in your bank account. That's Ken. It's not like Dragon Lash. He's super reliant on that move to win tournaments or anything like that. He's got a million options he can go to. And that's why I get a little bit upset with these players not looking past their own characters and their own strengths and whatnot. And I want to talk about that a little bit, because I do feel that it's very hard to assess one's own character and think about their weaknesses and stuff, and not also couple in the strengths that you have as well. Because you're so often, when you're playing in tournament, you don't really focus as much on your wins. You don't think about those as often. You think so much more about your losses, where you're messed up at. You're focused so much on your weaknesses that it can be very hard to acknowledge your strengths.
For sure, because the emotional impact that comes, it's not to say that the highs aren't high, but one, you're going to have a lot more losses than you're going to have wins, as you know, especially in tournaments. And I don't want to say that everyone that is saying that Ken isn't in the top 5 or isn't in the top 3 is speaking in bad faith.
Right.
There is probably an element to that, and it's more like they have a bias and they're allowing that to inform at least part of their opinion, and fair enough. But I do think that this placement of him is fairly egregious, and man, the meme right now is that Phenom, who's been going around interviewing all these Japanese players and asking them, is secretly behind the scenes has a gun to them or something, or is holding them hostage, and that this is all in an Illuminati cult effort to get Ken not nerfed.
Right.
But I do think that this character comes together in a way that other characters don't, and you could compare him, like, people say that Juri's, and I would agree with this, Juri's drive rush is better. Her engagement is quicker, at least through drive rush and stuff. And it's like, yeah, that's true. And, Ryu's standing heavy punch is actually better than Ken's. Despite Ken's being amazing, Ryu's has better framed at it. Mm-hmm. And you could find characters that do all the things that Ken does, but no one has his low forward game paired with his follow-ups after connections, paired with his ability to engage, and the amount of matter-of-fact and relatively easy-to-perform mental stack that Ken puts on players. You think about it this way, Manon, and I think it was 801 Strider talking about this, I might be mistaken, but in this game, if Ken hits you, he's going into some kind of a combo that's going to probably carry you to the corner and maybe even give him Oki, and that's a really advantageous thing. Or he might just Dragon Lash in, be +1, and it might not go in his direction, but it's more likely that when you're +1, things are going to go in your direction than not. Okay, compare that to Manon. When she plays, she gets a hit, she gets her medallion and we're back to neutral, and she has to earn that whole thing all over again. Ken can snowball with his advantages. So not only is he quick to engage, but once he's there, he can stick on you. He has all the things you need to have to be good in this game.
Yeah, no, it's super well said. It's an embarrassment of riches, and it's man, I really wish that our community would be a little bit more acknowledging of that. But as we've illustrated here, it's hard to do that. But I do want to actually talk here a little bit about JP, because we've seen numerous people here in the comments accuse you of downplaying the character, and I want to double check here. Where do you have him at the tier list right now?
So where did I start? I had him somewhere around top 5. I upped it to top 4. I'll say this, like, I'm not trying to win tournaments with JP. I'm not super preoccupied with if they nerf him or not. I'm just trying to thrive in this game with a character, and I very well may play Akuma when he comes out. So that's my level of attachment to JP's abilities in the competitive realm. With that all in mind, if I had to place him right now, I am more influenced by the fact that everybody seems to be putting JP at number 1. And I'll also say that as far as this Ken discussion, seeing this many high-level players put Ken this low, a lot of us are thinking, wait, maybe I am wrong. Maybe I don't know, because that social pressure is real, especially if they have a lot on their resume.
Yeah, I mean, all these players we're talking about would kick our butts any day, kind of thing. Like, we're not better players than these guys. They're hands down better than we are, but yes. Yeah,
and so right now I feel a very big pressure to put JP even higher. I do not see that in my own gameplay, but I am an 1800 MR JP player, and I concede that my point of view is only, so limited. So with all that in mind, if I'm just going with my gut on how I feel and my perception of the character, I'd put him around 4th place.
Okay.
But I continue with everything else in play. I'd say maybe he is a top 3.
Gotcha. And I want to highlight this to show that your opinion of him has evolved. You've grown over time to say that you think the character is better and other stuff. And we might see that with the Kin players that we're hearing from in the community right now. That'd be, right there at Fav Cup, gun to their heads from Phenom, we'll to see a Nerf gun or something like that. They all felt that, maybe they didn't want to say Kin's name or something weird like that.
There was a Nerf gun to Ken's head, and so that's why they're saying what they want. Yeah.
I did it! But,
well, I would argue that we have now arrived at that second or third, that next level of analysis. And the argument is, because I think a lot of these players release tier lists with Ken up in the top.
Right.
And now it's that we've learned that because people have figured out Dragon Lash, because people know more when the breaks in the Jinrai kicks are, and because they've put Ken in the lab, that now he has dropped to 6th, 7th, 8th place, wherever they're saying he's at. So I would think that, no, they've already gone through that and they've dropped him as a result.
Yeah. I would hope that swings back around, especially I'm sure with the backlash that they are seeing and feeling in a whole multitude of ways if they're checking their social media and other stuff like that. It's pretty heavy out there right now. But oh man, the interesting theory here with Capcom and when they do balance changes, and again, I think that's really at the root of a lot of what we're talking about here, is everyone's genuinely afraid of their main getting nerfed. Capcom has an inexplicable habit of grabbing a mid-tier character and nerfing them into oblivion. We saw that with Vega in Street Fighter V, and we're wondering if that's going to happen here. And then sometimes they'll take a top-tier character like a Cammy or a Luke, and they will remain completely untouched, or they will remain very high tier, or in some inexplicable cases, they will get buffed. So I don't think it's a lock necessarily that Ken is going to get nerfed in Season 2. He might remain exactly the same, and in a crazy situation, because Capcom sometimes does weird stuff, he might actually get buffs. And oh my gosh, I hope that does not happen. I really hope that does not happen.
No, I don't see that happening. If that happens, then what are we even doing here? But I'll say this, that I don't think that you can pick, honestly, that many characters that are conclusively better than Ken, that are higher than him on the tier list. If you think about it, because as we've wrestled with, pick the top 10, it's easy to list off, or pick the top 5. It's easy to list off a bunch of characters, then you realize, oh wait, I have to pick just a couple of these, and I have like 10 characters that feel like they're top 5. Well, if you look at it from the point of view of rank characters that Ken is not as good as, you know, you have him rifling off Chun-Li, you have him rifling off Cammy, you have him saying, like, I think that there's an argument to be made for Luke. I think there's an argument to be made that has been made continually by the community that JP is better.
Yeah.
You might be able to weasel, and in my personal opinion, maybe Jury. Maybe Jury. But no one else is like Jury's is that well. But when I think about it, I can't honestly put more than maybe Luke and JP, and I certainly don't think JP, above Ken. It's like I could maybe finagle my own tier list into saying Ken's third, fourth at best, and probably not. But can you honestly say, oh yeah, Cammy's better? Yeah, JP's better. Well, maybe. All these other characters. Marissa's better. That was one of them too. It's like Marissa's a higher tier character. It's like, dude,
no way.
I get that these characters are good. I get that they're high tier. I get that they excel in certain situations. But it does not come together for any of these characters like it comes together for Ken, and they are not as, what would you say, accessible or easy to make it come together with like it is for Ken.
Yeah, the stats and the eye test and everything we've seen, they just don't back it up. So, yeah, so that's our thoughts on Ken. We wanted to get these out there and really try to set the record straight, at least from our perspective of what we're seeing. Again, we don't have any kind of agenda here beyond. We're trying to report and do as accurate stuff as we can. Doesn't mean everyone's going to agree with us, doesn't mean we're always right about stuff, but our agenda is to get information out there so people can have these discussions, and it's why it's called Talk and Block. Have a discussion here, enjoy it in the comments, let us hear it on social media. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to hear what you guys think. Is there some validity to what people like Chris T are saying and those that are also in House Tartarian? Or is it just a bunch of shenanigans?